Alex Matthews had always been a man of principles. He grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name and where loyalty and honesty were held in high regard. His parents, working-class people, had instilled in him the values of hard work and integrity. At 38 years old, Alex had built a life he was proud of: a successful career as a project manager for a tech firm, a comfortable home in the suburbs, and most importantly, a family he adored. He met Emily when he was 25 during a business trip to Boston, where she lived and worked as a marketing executive. Emily, 2 years younger, was ambitious, bright, and had a charisma that was hard to ignore. They clicked almost immediately, and their relationship quickly turned serious. Within 2 years, they were married and soon settled down in a charming house in the outskirts of Cincinnati. Alex loved the quietness of suburban life, the kind of security that comes with stability and routine. Emily, originally from a more upscale neighborhood in Boston, had a different upbringing. Her father was a well-known attorney, and her mother ran a successful interior design business. Growing up, Emily had been used to finer things: luxury vacations, private schools, expensive clothes. But she never acted like she was above anyone, and that was one of the things Alex had loved about her. She had an air of sophistication, but she didn't seem spoiled or entitled. Or so Alex had thought. Their first child, Sophie, was born when Alex was 30 and Emily was 28. Alex was over the moon when she arrived, holding his tiny daughter for the first time with awe and a sense of responsibility that he had never felt before. 2 years later, Lucas followed, and their family felt complete. Alex relished his role as a father, always making time for soccer games, school plays, and weekend outings. His kids meant the world to him, and he worked tirelessly to provide for them. For years, life seemed perfect. Emily had left her job to focus on raising the kids, and Alex took pride in being the breadwinner, coming home each evening to a loving family. Or at least, that's what he thought. In hindsight, there were signs he had missed, small inconsistencies that now seemed glaring in the light of what was about to unfold. Emily had always been somewhat guarded about certain aspects of her past. She had a few friends from her old life in Boston that Alex never really got to know, and sometimes she would spend hours on the phone with people he had never met. He chalked it up to normal behavior. Everyone had their private world after all. He trusted her. But trust, as Alex would soon discover, could be a fragile thing. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Alex had come home a little later than usual. Work had been stressful, a big project deadline looming, and all he wanted was to relax with his family. The kids were in their rooms, finishing up homework, and Emily was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The familiar sounds of home should have been comforting: the clinking of dishes, the faint murmur of the TV in the living room, but something felt off. Alex couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was an unfamiliar tension in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made his skin prickle. He tried to shake it off, joining Emily in the kitchen to help with dinner. They chatted about mundane things, his workday, the kids' school activities, but even Emily seemed distant, distracted. She wasn't her usual chatty self, and every now and then, Alex caught her glancing at her phone nervously. He didn't ask why. He wasn't the jealous type, and their marriage had always been solid. Or so he believed. After dinner, Alex excused himself to make a work call in his home office, needing to finalize some details for an upcoming meeting. He was on the phone for about half an hour when he realized he had left an important file in the living room. As he hung up, he quietly made his way down the hallway, intending to grab the file and get back to work. That's when he heard it. His steps slowed as he approached the living room, and his ears caught Emily's voice, low and urgent. She was speaking to Sophie and Lucas, her tone uncharacteristically hushed. Alex paused just outside the door, curiosity piqued. It wasn't like Emily to be secretive with the kids, and something in the way she was speaking set off alarm bells in his mind. He stood in the shadow of the hallway listening. "You two should be quiet," Emily whispered sharply. "He doesn't need to know he isn't your real dad until you're done with college. He'll take care of us." The words hit Alex like a physical blow. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of what he had just heard. Asterisk not your real dad asterisk, the phrase echoed in his mind, making his stomach churn with nausea. It couldn't be true. The asterisk had asterisk to be some kind of misunderstanding. His vision blurred for a moment, and his body felt like it was rooted to the spot, as though moving might shatter the fragile reality he was clinging to. His mind raced. What did she mean? Not your real dad. Who were they talking about? Sophie and Lucas, his children, asterisk weren't his asterisk. He could barely breathe as the weight of those words settled in, suffocating him with their implications. In a daze, Alex backed away from the doorway and returned to his office, his hands trembling. The betrayal was so raw, so incomprehensible, that his thoughts became jumbled. He had raised those children, loved them, cared for them, worked to provide for them. They were his entire world. And now, in one moment, everything had been called into question. Had Emily been cheating on him all these years? Had she known all along that Sophie and Lucas weren't his? And worse, had she been lying to him from the very beginning, using him as nothing more than a provider, a tool to support her and children that weren't even his? The idea twisted his insides, filling him with a sense of utter helplessness. Suddenly, the signs he had ignored for years came rushing back. Emily's unexplained trips to Boston, her secretive phone calls, the way she had sometimes seemed distant, even indifferent. It all made sense now, a puzzle he hadn't known he was trying to solve. She had been deceiving him, playing him for a fool, while he poured everything he had into a family that wasn't even truly his. Alex sat in his office chair, his head in his hands, trying to control the storm of emotions brewing inside him. Anger, betrayal, grief, confusion. It was all too much to process. He thought about confronting her, storming into the living room and demanding the truth. But a part of him was too broken, too wounded, to face it head-on. He needed time to think, to plan his next move carefully. This wasn't just an affair. It was an entire life built on lies. That night, Alex didn't sleep. He stayed in the office, going over everything in his mind again and again. Each time, the betrayal felt deeper, more painful. He could barely look at his wedding ring without feeling sick. How could Emily have done this to him? How could she have betrayed not only him, but the children as well? Did Sophie and Lucas even know the truth? The more he thought about it, the clearer his path became. There would be no confrontation, no messy fight that would leave things unresolved. Alex wasn't a man who made rash decisions. He had always been calculated, logical, even in the worst of situations. And now more than ever, he needed to stay level-headed. He wasn't just going to walk away. He was going to burn everything Emily had built on her lies to the ground. By dawn, Alex had made his decision. He would leave. But he wouldn't leave quietly. He would disappear without a trace, and Emily wouldn't see it coming. He would strip her of everything. The house, the financial support, the life she had grown accustomed to. And he would make sure she paid for every single lie she had told. As the first light of morning crept through the window, Alex packed a suitcase in silence. He moved methodically, his mind focused on the plan ahead. He didn't take much, just the essentials. Enough to last him a few days while he figured out the next steps. He left his phone on the nightstand, not wanting to be traced or contacted. When Emily woke up, she wouldn't find him. She wouldn't know where he had gone. Before leaving, Alex took one last look at the home he had worked so hard to build. The kitchen where they had shared meals, the living room where they had laughed and watched movies together, the children's bedrooms filled with memories. All of it was tainted now. A lie. With a deep breath, Alex walked out the front door and vanished, leaving behind the life he had once thought was perfect. Alex hadn't looked back since the morning he walked out of his home. As the hours stretched into days and the days into weeks, the shock of his discovery began to harden into something colder, something far more dangerous. Betrayal had a way of transforming love into a weapon, and Alex intended to use it. He wasn't a man to act on impulse, but when pushed, he knew how to strike where it hurt the most. He would dismantle Emily's life piece by piece, as carefully and deliberately as she had lied to him for years. He spent his first night away from home in a small motel, just outside of town. It was a far cry from the comfort of his suburban life, but the discomfort suited his mood. Alone in the dark, the gravity of the situation weighed on him like a lead blanket. The woman he had loved, the children he had adored, none of it was real. Or, at least, not in the way he had thought. But he wasn't ready to confront his emotions, not yet. There would be time for that later. Right now, he needed to focus on something else. Revenge. The following day, Alex contacted a lawyer, an old college friend named Mark Reynolds, who had since built a reputation as one of the most ruthless family attorneys in Ohio. Mark specialized in divorce cases, particularly those involving infidelity. Alex knew he was the right man for the job. "Alex, I'm sorry, man," Mark said when they met in his office. "I can't imagine how you're feeling right now." "I'm not here for sympathy, Mark," Alex replied, his voice flat. "I'm here because I want her out of my life, and I want to make sure she pays for what she did." Mark nodded, understanding the gravity of his friend's words. "Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." Alex took a deep breath and recounted the entire ordeal. The conversation he overheard, the years of suspected secrecy, and the crushing realization that Sophie and Lucas weren't his biological children. The more he spoke, the more the rage simmered beneath the surface, fueling his need for justice. Mark listened carefully, scribbling notes as Alex talked. When he was finished, there was a long pause. "We have several options here," Mark began, his tone turning professional. "The first thing we'll need to do is establish paternity for Sophie and Lucas. If they aren't yours, you're not legally obligated to support them. We'll also need to get a court order to force a DNA test, just to confirm everything. Once that's done, you'll have grounds to sue Emily for paternity fraud." Alex's jaw clenched. What happens if the test confirms they aren't mine? Well, for one, you'll be able to cut off any financial support immediately. Since you were married when the kids were born, you've been the presumed father under the law. But if we can prove they aren't biologically yours, you'll be free of any legal obligation." "And what about the house?" Alex asked. He had spent years paying off the mortgage, ensuring Emily and the kids had a stable home. Now the thought of them living there while he was banished to a motel filled him with disgust. "We can work on that too. You can file for an immediate eviction order. Technically, the house is in your name alone, since you were the one paying the mortgage. If you can prove Emily committed fraud by deceiving you about the children, it strengthens your case to remove her from the property." The coldness in Alex's chest grew. He pictured Emily's face when she realized everything was slipping away from her. "Good," he said quietly. "Do it." The legal machine began to move quickly. Within a week, Alex's lawyer had drafted the necessary documents and the lawsuit for paternity fraud was filed. The court would soon order a DNA test for both Sophie and Lucas. It was the first step in what would be a long, grueling process, but Alex was committed. Every time he felt a twinge of doubt, every time a memory of the children threatened to soften his resolve, he reminded himself of Emily's lies, her cold manipulation. The eviction notice was set next. Alex had returned to the house since the day he left, but he imagined the chaos that would ensue when Emily opened the door to find the official letter. He didn't feel guilty. She had used him for years, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. Emily hadn't contacted Alex since he left. For the first week, she had called him repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that he ignored. Her messages were a mix of confusion, anger, and desperation. "Alex, where are you? What's going on?" Her first message had said, her voice trembling. "Please come home. We need to talk." As the days passed, her tone grew more anxious. "You can't just leave like this. What about the kids? Alex, we need you here." But Alex didn't respond. He had nothing to say to her. He had hired Mark to handle all communications. Any interaction from Emily or her lawyer would go through him. Eventually, the calls stopped, replaced by silence. Alex figured Emily had gotten the message. Whatever life they had shared was over. But it was only after the eviction notice arrived that Emily finally broke her silence. One afternoon, while Alex was sitting in a temporary apartment he had rented in the city, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "Alex, what the hell is this?" It was Emily, and her voice was sharp with anger. "An eviction notice? Are you seriously kicking us out of the house?" "Yes," Alex replied calmly, staring out the window. "It's my house. You and your kids can find somewhere else to live. Your house? Asterisk or asterisk house, Alex? You can't just throw us out." "I can, actually. And I will. You've been lying to me for years, Emily. I'm done." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Alex could hear her breathing heavily. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with venom. "This isn't just about me. This is about Sophie and Lucas. They're your asterisk children too." "No, they're not," Alex said, his voice hard. "You made sure of that. Don't pretend like I owe you or them anything." Emily's tone shifted from anger to pleading. "Alex, please. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but it's not that simple. You've been their father for years. They need you." Alex closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay focused. He had been their father, but it had all been based on a lie. "I love them, Emily. I still do. But you?" His voice caught, and he had to pause for a moment before continuing. "You took that from me. You took everything from me." Tears filled Emily's voice when she spoke again. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know." "Easier for you," Alex snapped. "Not for me. You've been using me this whole time. And now it's over." "I know I made mistakes," Emily pleaded, "but you can't just walk away from the kids. They don't deserve this." Alex felt a pang of guilt, but he quickly pushed it aside. "They deserve the truth, and so do I." There was silence on the other end for a long moment before Emily finally spoke again, her voice low. "Who are you doing this for, Alex? Is this really about justice, or are you just trying to punish me?" "I'm doing this for myself," Alex said coldly. "And for them. They deserve to know who their real father is." With that, he ended the call, his hand shaking slightly as he set the phone down on the table. He stared at it for a moment, wondering if Emily had truly understood the depth of her betrayal. It didn't matter. He wasn't doing this for her approval. He was doing it because it was the only way he could regain control of his life. As the legal proceedings continued, Alex found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that Emily's world was falling apart. The house would soon be hers no longer, and the DNA tests were pending. It was all happening exactly as he had planned. But as the weeks went by, an unexpected feeling of hollowness began to creep in. He had envisioned this moment, the moment where Emily would face the consequences of her lies, and yet The reality was less satisfying than he had imagined. The silence of his empty apartment gnawed at him, the absence of the laughter and chatter of Sophie and Lucas leaving a void he hadn't anticipated. He had been so focused on his anger that he hadn't fully considered what it would be like to live without the children he had raised for so many years. But every time he began to doubt himself, he reminded himself of the betrayal. He would replay Emily's whispered words in his mind, her casual cruelty as she told the children to keep quiet, to let him believe the lie until they were safely through college. The memory was enough to stoke the fire of his resolve. Then came the day he had been waiting for, the results of the DNA test. Alex sat in Mark's office, his hands folded tightly in his lap, as his lawyer opened the envelope. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and Alex could feel the thudding of his own heartbeat in his chest. Mark scanned the document, his expression neutral, before looking up at Alex. "It's confirmed. Neither Sophie nor Lucas is your biological child." Alex's stomach dropped, even though he had been expecting it. He felt an odd mix of relief and devastation. The truth was out, but the weight of it was crushing. Mark slid the paper across the desk, but Alex didn't mean to read it. He knew what it said. He had never been their father, not really. Emily had made sure of that. "What now?" Alex asked quietly, his voice hollow. Mark leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Now we move forward with the lawsuit. We'll sue for paternity fraud and make sure she's held accountable. You'll be free of any financial obligation, and we can finalize the eviction. Emily will lose everything she's been using you for." Alex nodded, but the satisfaction he had once craved was starting to feel distant. He had won, legally speaking, but the victory felt empty. He had lost more than just a home and a wife. He had lost the family he thought was his, the children he had loved and cared for, the life he had built around them. It was all gone. But there was no turning back now. The DNA test results confirmed what Alex already knew deep in his heart. Sophie and Lucas were not his biological children. Yet despite his meticulous planning, this confirmation didn't bring him the satisfaction he had expected. The feeling of victory over Emily, the woman who had deceived him, felt like ashes in his mouth. He had set out to destroy her life, and now he was well on his way to achieving that goal, but the cost was higher than he had anticipated. The family he had built, the children he had loved, they were casualties in a war he never intended to fight. In the days following the DNA test results, Alex's life continued to unravel in unexpected ways. The lawsuit against Emily for paternity fraud was moving forward, and the eviction process was well underway. Soon, Emily would be forced to leave the house. The life she had constructed based on lies and manipulation was crumbling beneath her feet. But instead of feeling victorious, Alex was consumed by a heavy, suffocating emptiness. A few weeks later, Alex found himself sitting in his apartment, staring at the eviction notice that had been served to Emily. She and the kids would have to vacate the house in less than a month. It should have felt like justice, like the rightful conclusion to the hell she had put him through. But instead, all Alex could think about was the look on Sophie and Lucas's faces when they found out their world was about to change forever. He had loved those children, raised them as his own. And now, even though the truth had come out, the bonds he had formed with them were not so easily severed. A part of him still wanted to protect them, even though they weren't biologically his. They were innocent in all of this. Emily's deception wasn't their fault. He had become a father to them in every way that mattered, except, of course, in the one way that now defined everything. A few days later, Emily reached out again. This time, she didn't call. Instead, she sent an email, and its tone was markedly different from the angry, pleading messages she had left before. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm begging you to think about Sophie and Lucas. They don't understand what's happening. I haven't told them everything yet. They just know that you left and they're scared. I know you feel betrayed, and I don't blame you for leaving, but please don't abandon them. You've been their father all these years, and they love you. Whatever happens between us, they shouldn't have to suffer. Please, let's find a way to explain this to them without hurting them more than they already are." Alex stared at the email for a long time, his hands resting on the keyboard. He had spent so much time crafting his revenge, so much energy on making Emily pay, that he hadn't fully considered what it would do to Sophie and Lucas. They didn't know the truth yet. They didn't know that their father, the man who had been there for every birthday, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, wasn't really their father. What would that revelation do to them? For hours, Alex struggled with what to do. Part of him wanted to walk away completely, to burn every bridge and never look back. After all, none of this was his responsibility anymore. But another part of him, the part that still felt the weight of fatherhood, cooled its stomach the idea of abandoning Sophie and Lucas without explanation. They were just children, innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of a battle they didn't even know was being fought. In the end, Alex decided he couldn't ignore them any longer. Alex arranged a meeting with Emily, one final confrontation. They agreed to meet at a neutral place, a park near the house where Sophie and Lucas used to play on the weekends. It was late afternoon when he arrived, the sun casting long shadows over the playground, and the air was crisp with the scent of early autumn. He sat on a bench, waiting for Emily to arrive with the kids, his stomach churning with anxiety. Emily appeared a few minutes later, holding Lucas by the hand and walking next to Sophie. The kids looked unsure, their faces a mix of confusion and sadness. Alex's heart twisted painfully at the sight of them. He hadn't seen them in weeks, and the distance between them felt like an ocean. Emily met his eyes as they approached, her expression weary but calm. She looked thinner, more fragile than he remembered, as though the weight of the situation had taken a physical toll on her. There were no words of greeting, no pleasantries exchanged. This wasn't a time for small talk. "Hi, Dad," Sophie said quietly as she approached, her voice hesitant. Lucas stood by her side, his eyes wide and searching, waiting for some kind of explanation. "Hi, sweetheart," Alex said, his voice tight. The word Dad hit him like a punch in the gut. He wasn't sure if he deserved that title anymore, but for now he let it stand. "Why don't we sit down and talk for a minute?" They all sat on the bench, the tension thick in the air. Emily sat a little further away, giving Alex space to speak to the kids. "Sophie, Lucas," Alex began, struggling to find the right words. "I know things have been strange lately. I haven't been around, and I know you're probably wondering why." Lucas nodded, his small hands gripping the edges of the bench. "Are you mad at us, Dad?" Alex's chest tightened. "No, buddy. I'm not mad at you. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." He looked at Emily for a moment, and she gave him a small nod, silently encouraging him to continue. "There's something I need to tell you," Alex said, his voice soft but steady. "It's something you're old enough to understand, and it's important that you hear it from me." He paused, taking a deep breath. Sophie watched him intently, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. Lucas leaned into his sister, as though seeking comfort from her. "I love you both," Alex said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've loved you since the day you were born. You are my children in every way that matters to me." But he swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "But I'm not your biological father." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Sophie's face went pale, her lips parted as she tried to process what she had just heard. Lucas's brow furrowed, clearly not understanding. "What do you mean?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex glanced at Emily, who was now looking at the ground, tears shining in her eyes. She had left him to do this alone, and while he resented her for that, he also understood why. This was his responsibility now. "It means," Alex said carefully, "that your mom was with someone else before I came into the picture. That person, your biological father, wasn't around, so I stepped in and raised you. And I love you both like my own." Lucas looked confused. "So you're not really our dad?" Alex's heart shattered at the look on his son's face. "I'm still your dad," he said quickly. "I'll always be your dad, no matter what. But I wanted you to know the truth." Sophie stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. "So, everything was a lie?" Alex's chest tightened. "No, Sophie, not everything. I love you. I still love you. That's never been a lie." Tears streamed down Sophie's face, and Lucas, not fully understanding, began to cry as well. Alex reached out to pull them both into a hug, but Sophie stood up suddenly, pushing him away. "You lied to us," she shouted, her voice breaking with emotion. "You're just like Mom. You lied." Alex felt the sting of her words, but he stayed calm. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't know until recently." Sophie turned to Emily, her voice accusing. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you lie?" Emily's face was pale, and she struggled to find her voice. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said softly. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know." Sophie shook her head, her tears falling freely. "Easier? How is this easier?" Alex's heart ached as he watched the scene unfold. The truth, as painful as it was, had come out, and now they all had to live with the consequences. The meeting ended with tears and confusion. Sophie was angry, and Lucas was too young to fully understand what had happened. Emily had tried to comfort them, but it was clear that the damage had been done. Alex had hoped that telling them the truth would bring some kind of closure, but instead it had opened up wounds he wasn't sure would ever heal. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Emily and the kids moved out of the house, and Alex finalized the legal proceedings to cut ties with her financially. The house was now his alone, but it felt like an empty shell, a reminder of the life he had lost. One evening, a few weeks after the meeting in the park, Alex received an unexpected visit. It was Sophie. She stood on his doorstep, her eyes red from crying, but her expression determined. "I don't know what to think anymore," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm angry. I'm confused, but I don't want to lose you." Alex felt a surge of emotion and opened the door wider. "You're not going to lose me," he said softly. "I'm here. I'll always be here." Sophie hesitated, then stepped inside. They sat together in the living room, and for the first time in weeks, they talked. It wasn't easy, and there were still tears, but it was a start. Sophie was hurt, but she wasn't ready to let go of the man who had been her father for so many years. Lucas followed in his sister's footsteps a few days later. He too was confused and hurt, but he still saw Alex as his dad. Slowly, over time, they began to rebuild their relationship, though it would never be the same. As for Emily, she moved on. She and Alex no longer spoke except through lawyers, and their relationship remained fractured beyond repair. She tried to apologize, but Alex had already closed that chapter of his life. He had no more room for her lies. In the end, the truth had destroyed everything that Alex once knew, but it had also given him something else. A chance to rebuild, a chance to redefine what family meant. Sophie and Lucas would always be a part of his life, even if the nature of their bond had changed. And though he had lost the woman he had once loved, Alex had found something more important, his own sense of self, free from the lies that had once defined him.